Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Entry Podcast. I'm your host, Francis Gorman. If you're enjoying our content, please take a moment to like and follow the show wherever you get your podcast from. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Alex Tyrrell, who is the head of advanced technology at Walters Kluwer and chief technology officer for Walter Kluwer Health. Alex also oversees Walter Kluwer's AI Center of Excellence, focused on accelerating innovation across all Walter Kluwer's divisions in areas of Gen AI, agentic, machine learning, and data analytics. Alex has extensive experience designing and delivering commercial scale machine learning and analytics platforms and setting technology strategy for enterprise content management, digital transformation, and new product development. Alex, it's a pleasure to have you here with me today.
Awesome. Thanks, Francis. Great to be here.
It's great to have you, Alex. And I suppose as the chief technology officer and over the AI Center of Excellence, you're wearing many hats.
Mm.
So I suppose I'd like to ask you, what are the guiding principles that kind of shape your long term technology strategy, specifically in the healthcare side of things?
Foremost, right, we don't compromise on trust. When you look at Walters Kluwer, as a company, we have 189 years going back to J.B. Lippincott within our nursing business. And really, our customers trust us to be the gold standard in evidence-based tools and support. Yeah. Absolutely, bring technology innovation to the market with a focus on safety and efficacy. And then, as a CTO, things have obviously been changing very fast, particularly with the introduction of Gen AI. And I've been doing this for a long time, and AI presents a lot of unique challenges, right? You sort of have to develop this intuition, right? You have to be able to adapt and pivot quickly. We're talking about non-determinism, right? It's not obvious that you have a clear path to success, that you can get a good problem solution fit. And in the clinical setting, you're building AI to support professionals, and it's really, really demanding, right? You're looking at, entirely new methods of sort of evaluating clinical relevance, whether or not the solution is going to add the right value. It's demanding in new ways, yeah? So, that's a little bit of sort of where I focus. And ultimately, when you really think about some of the changes that have been occurring with Gen AI, I think about like the overall day in a life, right? So whereas, we used to be really, really heavy focus on maybe like architecture, design, UX and wireframes, right? That's sort of evolving, right? We, particularly with agentic AI, we want to own the outcome, right? We want to deliver the outcome, not the little breadcrumb trails, the transactional moments, all the clicking, those interfaces that tend to be sort of challenging to use, right? And sort of, that traditional focus on containers, microservices, APIs. I'll be honest with you, we're talking a lot more about p-value, confidence interval, and sample size. That's a huge shift, right? We're moving more towards sort of experimental, but with rigorous validation. And of course, traditional IT still plays a really, really important role. We'll probably get into that a little bit. But this is a big change for technologists. I mean, they just haven't had this type of experience in the past, most likely. Some data scientists may be familiar with some of these things, but and particularly in a healthcare setting, that's where we're really fortunate to have access to on-staff licensed physicians. These are folks that are involved in care delivery, and they understand evidence-based practice. They understand this is based on research and experimentation. So we developed a strategy that we call Expert AI, and it's really AI solutions by experts for experts. Obviously, this is a focus on expert in the loop at every stage of design, validation, and testing. It's rigorous. It's ensuring safety, efficacy, and clinical relevance. And that has really helped us kind of align, bringing together, technologists and what they do best, and clinicians and what they do best. And that has really been a key part of sort of the long-term guiding principles that are shaping our current sort of early work and early focus around Gen AI and agentic and these new technologies. And certainly it's going to be part of our long-term vision. Again, so expert AI, expert solutions, expert AI by experts for experts. Yeah.
That term "expert in the loop," I haven't heard that before, but it makes
Mhm.
absolute sense when you say it out loud. Human in the loop has always been the thing, but now that I'm thinking about it,
Yeah.
do you want the human to understand what the
Yeah.
loop is telling
We
them?
got to go
So
upstream, right? Before there's any loop at all, we have to understand, what does that loop look like? What is it meant to do? And the experts really help us. They help us break down the complex problems. I mean, again, owning the outcome means you need to really understand, um, you know, What is the intent? What are you trying to achieve? What is the purpose? What are the risks? We feel like it doesn't make a lot of sense to have AI engineers, develop, complex solutions in a clinical setting for which they really know nothing about. Um, and then to rely on simple, like, more or less, benchmarks and statistical proxies as sort of their guiding principles, they really don't reflect the complexities of the real world. That expert in the loop gives us that. It establishes the guardrails, the firm foundation, and makes sure as we innovate and really speed up those innovation cycles, that we're doing it safely in a trustworthy manner, and we can provide that explainability and transparency along the way. Yeah.
Makes total sense, Alex. It really does. Yeah, no, that's a key nugget takeaway for me already now, and I'm going to start.
We're only
I'm
one
going to start.
question in.
I'm going to start. I'm going to
Yeah.
start changing my perspective slightly
All
on
right.
that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Um, I suppose, and the expert aspect, you're dealing with clinical environments, obviously.
Yeah.
So if things go wrong, they go wrong at a real human level. So what is the most misunderstood aspect of integrating AI into those clinical workflows from an executive perspective, even? Because I'm assuming the complexities are far greater than making somebody's PowerPoint have nice slides and that sort of thing. Like you're dealing with with human beings at the far side of this, so the risk must be higher.
Yeah, so this actually builds kind of on the point that I just made. So we have technologists going through this sort of transformations, this journey, shifting from all these details around building enterprise technology, cloud APIs, microservices, and getting a more of an experimental understanding of how we add value. Right? Again, going back to like basic statistical principles. These are not familiar themes. How experimental design, measurement error, uncertainty, risk of bias, these are not typically the types of themes that you would expect a technologist to command, and that extends all the way up, in a way, up to the executive stakeholders that are learning and beginning to understand that, like, the path to AI value is just not linear. It's not structured in the way that maybe your traditional enterprise SaaS offerings have progressed historically, with specific planning, basically breaking down features and using your agile safe. Those are good solid techniques. We tend to decouple from the sort of what we call the agile release train now, right? We're doing really experimental work, and in order to refine that right value, to make sure that we do it safely and effectively, it requires new forms of governance, and as well as sort of an increased focus on go to market. Right, there are new challenges out there, right? So, first of all, when we look at AI and our experience over the past couple of years with Gen AI, is it's really not as effective as sort of a bolt-on or point solution, right? There is the entire ecosystem now to consider, right? And by the way, that tends to be true across industries, and it takes time to develop that right value. The impact in the environments you're deploying into needs to be considered, right? And there may be new training requirements for people using the solutions. You may be involved in piloting and testing and increased governance. This may be very different from the way that you were building sort of your traditional SaaS products in the past, right? Um, Most importantly, AI is sort of tying together stakeholders more closely, right? So your technologists, your product folks, your go-to-market, our expert clinicians, our customers, we're really working a lot more closely. So that takes time. And you can't just release AI into the wild. And I think we're learning that as we go. We're sort of maturing, right? And so, you're not only experimenting to see if you get a good problem solution fit using the core technology. We've got great success at doing that so far, right? But you're also experimenting to get that right product market fit, the commercials, the adoption, the willingness to pay, the overall governance. With AI, particularly Gen AI and agentic, it's all still very new, right? So we're figuring that sort of as we go. And this is the part that I really like to emphasize. As a CTO, you may find you feel more like the chief explanation officer, like, what happened with these experiments, and our assumptions. How do we pivot? What are we going to do here? Are these investments going to bear fruit? Are we? Do we have the right strategy? And I've been doing this for 25 years, and this is the biggest change I've seen. And I like to sort of relate it. Having a PhD helps a lot when you're sort of the chief explanation officer. And if you find yourself in an executive meeting that feels like a thesis defense, that's probably a good sign things are working and you're moving past the early challenges of AI adoption and really getting into that real value.
One of the things that always interests me is what are those key kind of adoption, um how do I put this now? Like when I think of financial institutions, you look at fraud detection. AI can help there. You look at better customer experiences. Maybe help desk and all that sort of thing. When it comes to healthcare and those innovations, what does that tech look like? What is AI being used for? What are the use cases?
A few months ago, we released our up-to-date Expert AI. And that is basically Expert AI is built on decades long commitment to curating the gold standard in evidence based clinical decision support. That's used by approximately 3 million clinicians around the world. And we really continue that tradition by grounding Gen AI in our trusted and verified content. Again, having those experts in the loop. This is preventing hallucinations, but it's also designing the solution, again, as we talked about, making sure that it's explainable and transparent, right? So that's providing now on-demand guidance and recommendations at the point of care safely and effectively. It's saving clinicians valuable time, and it's allowing them to focus on patient care. Another area that we're finding really, really good value, and I would sort of wend this in, right? Technology changes all the time. 3 years ago, we were talking about, AR, VR, the metaverse. This is sort of pre-Gen AI. And that maybe we're a little early on that technology cycle. But we actually found really, really good value and use of technologies like this in our nursing products, where we could basically use virtual simulation and learning solutions. It's a great way to remove risk and increase access to authentic learning environments and help create clinical competence, right? Where it's difficult to actually have clinical practice. So these simulations, these new technology solutions are really valuable there. And now we're using Gen AI. We're looking at basically focus and adaptive learning, remediation, intervention, so that the students on their learning journey are getting improvements all the time. It's another great area, great use case for AI, Gen AI, and ultimately agentic. Yeah.
Where do you think we're going? So let's say by 2030, if you were to look forward with your CTO hat on and that innovative vision, where do you think we'll be in this space? Is the world going to look very different than it does today?
The virtual twin. I'm really, really excited about this concept. Where you're programming basically computer simulations, programming them with your genetic profile, your physiology. It's combined sort of with continuous monitoring, as well as your specific healthcare history. And then you're introducing advanced modeling and simulation to improve diagnosis and treatment planning, as well as focusing on things like preventative medicine, predicting disease, and offering more choice early in disease progression. Now, the personal connection. In my PhD and postdoc many, many years ago, I won't say how long ago, but I focused a lot on what we call in silico simulation of tumor biology. So you're in vivo, in vitro. So this was in silico, all done in computer. And it was using the sort of earliest versions of GPUs. And at that time, the GPUs were small, so we could simulate a small tissue compartment with a single tumor. But we could simulate a lot of detail, everything from blood flow to drug delivery. It was really, really interesting. And obviously, today's GPUs are orders of magnitude more powerful. Much more complex biological systems could be modeled. And this is really exciting in my estimation, and in fact, very doable. And I think we'll see this begin to emerge, at least over the next 5 years. Yeah.
Must inform my wife I'm going to have a digital twin in the future. I'm not sure how she'd feel.
Yeah. And that can be helpful in the workplace too, right?
You
Yeah.
just go do those tasks and come back to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a fascinating concept. But yeah, as I think I struggle myself to visualize what would it be like in 6 months' time. Never mind by 2030, at the rate of change we're seeing at the moment. And like something that comes up often with our guests is we talk about responsible AI and ethical AI and all of those things. What does that mean in practice for an organization like yourselves operating in kind of high risk environments like healthcare?
Not every use case has the same level of risk. And so we have to sort of, look at that, very specifically in a rigorous way. So, most importantly, we don't aim to replace clinical reasoning and judgment, right? But we have to assess algorithms on their ability to follow, for example, expert instructions, our expert in the loop, and to identify all the relevant clinical context and deliver what we call clinical intelligence, right? It's not replacing clinical judgment or reasoning, but we're making sure that our algorithms can think and act like a clinician, and not replace them. And that really helps actually make sure that we can provide explainability and transparency, which is an absolute must around sort of ethical and responsible use of AI, right? We have to make sure it's safe, most importantly. And then we also perform a series of sort of intense efforts with our licensed physicians on staff. And this is really to assess whether a solution has the potential for bias or the potential to cause patient harm. And we test and validate everything thoroughly, right? And here's another really, really important criteria that really goes to the heart of governance and ethical and responsible AI. We don't just turn on AI features in the wild. We don't just launch a product feature in an existing product and say, here's a button, try this, right? We absolutely have to work with our customers and our partners and make sure that we roll out solutions in a controlled way, right? So we'll take additional clinical feedback from the front line and make any additional adjustments until the solution is trusted and demonstrated to be safe.
That makes sense and is comforting, I have to say.
Good,
You're
yeah.
not just flicking it on.
No, yeah, no,
The
just turn it on. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
so many people just turn it on.
yeah, yeah,
It's good.
yeah,
It's good to know that you're not just flicking it on.
yeah.
Alex, one thing I suppose that always intrigues me is looking at the regulatory state and kind of Europe versus the US. When I look at frameworks like FDA oversight of artificial intelligence and machine learning, um, over the next number of years, how do you see that framework kind of coming to fruition? And do you
Mhm.
see any changes that are going to come through there that will impact the technology side?
Yeah, I mean, so if you go back to like even the early introduction of LLMs and sort of understanding that they're ubiquitous models, they can do a lot of things, right? And so these generic large language models began to become sort of embedded in our everyday life, including workplace settings and including likely healthcare settings, right? The problem with on their own, they aren't very explainable and transparent, right? They add value, they can be powerful, but they're trained on the web and all of its darkest corners, right? Now that obviously poses some sort of fundamental risk. Now we've developed many ways sort of rehabilitate your sort of generic LLM, things like grounding, preventing hallucinations, making them more explainable. But I would expect like at least some form of guidance around how generic LLM should be used in clinical settings, right? And in fact, you're already seeing generic LLMs implementing more restrictions, guardrails, and warnings, which I think is positive, right? Now, I think when you really look at where the technology is evolving, I think there's going to be a distinction between sort of your agentic AI workflows with the capacity to make changes automatically, right? Versus AI that is designed to be more sort of that oversight, that human in the loop at each step, verifying. I think the regulatory authorities in the FDA may focus more on agentic AI designed to act independently. But in all cases, increased explainability and transparency will be operative. Things like citing any sources used, identifying potential risks, and recommending mitigation should be the focus basically for all the AI solutions, right? We feel trust is key, and establishing trust is a shared responsibility across all stakeholders in the ecosystem, clinicians, hospitals, in care settings, vendors, and service providers, as well as regulatory authorities. We all need to work together here. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that does make sense, and I think trust. I think you've said trust a few times there, and it's something that I almost I find it hard to fathom sometimes how human trust has shifted away from institutions and experts to algorithms and machines. It's that sideways trust now. Like a couple of years ago, no one would have trusted the car to drive them around without a steering wheel or accelerator or brakes, but we're heading there. So like
I mean that
th-
trust thing. I think I'll just jump in real quick if you don't mind. I think this is another really important point that I think we want to cover here too. So like this trust in the technology, this confidence in the technology, it could be a potential failure mode, right? So like LLMs are designed to answer questions and to respond with what seems like increasing levels of confidence. I don't know if you notice this, but I do, right? Um, we all understand there is a risk of hallucination that's been around for a long time, and that's certainly a risk. And we're doing a lot of things to mitigate that risk, but that the purported confidence, the blazing speed at which these LLMs can answer questions, including clinical questions, it creates a powerful psychological effect. And another risk, potentially even bigger risk, may be this sort of notion of de-skilling or over-reliance on this new technology, right? Um, Especially like in a clinical setting, especially without the right clinical judgment at those crucial clinical moments when it matters most, right? The machine seems to know what's going on here, and so you move forward. And this really could become sort of a widespread failure mode as more of these tools become available, right? So at Walter School, we talk a lot about how to create AI solutions that don't fatigue the user, don't encourage them to let the guard down. Instead, focus on determining the right clinical context when nuances evolve. Make sure you don't overburden the clinician with too much information, but encourage engagement and support the clinical reasoning and judgment of the clinician at each step.
It's very reassuring to hear you say that, and I say that for a number of reasons. There's a very funny meme going around. It kind of has a sinister background to it, and it basically says your future doctor is using ChatGPT to pass their exams. Eat healthy.
Right.
You know?
My other favorite meme. I live in Colorado, and obviously we focus on safety first, but there's a meme in Colorado in the mountain country, safety third, which is we don't believe in that, right? So yeah, it's interesting to hear about this.
Yeah, it is. I know it has a pun that if we do this cognitive offload, that we lose some of those skills, and if the machine goes down and you're in the middle of something, will you have that recall, or is that reliance there? And I think that's kind of what you've touched on to make sure that that doesn't happen, that you don't create a brittle human at the end of the process.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely.
Alex, I'm always interested to talk about shadow AI in organizations because we see it all over the place in different companies that we interface with, etc. Where employees are just throwing data into ChatGPT or into other generative AI tools or whatever. I see it all over the place when I go to visit my accountant. They've ChatGPT open on one screen and my accountant's on the other, and I'm going, are they cross pollinating or what's going on there? Like how do you control shadow AI as a chief technology officer, and you've got that technology on state in front of you, but the users are potentially putting data elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's an interesting one, and the former incarnations of this ghost IT. This isn't really a new concept, but it's maybe a little bit more nuance and subtlety with the introductions of LLMs, right? Because I don't think everybody's completely aware of some of the potential risks, right? So first and foremost, you have to revisit your standard IT governance. Again, ghost IT and shadow IT. This stuff's been around for a while. It's not completely new. But what you have to do is you sort of have to, in my estimation, add a dedicated AI governance framework. That's really, really going to help you understand where the risk is. What sort of compliance controls are you going to need? How do you evaluate safety, clinical relevance, things like that, right? So you're also obviously going to be putting emphasis on the trusted zones. The closer you get to protected health information, the bedside, patient care, point of care, sort of the more stringent standards. Listen, these technologies can be very useful across the board in our everyday lives and some of the work we do in a general workplace setting. And so finding that right fit and being able to measure that is key. Here's another key: the culture of no or delaying adoption, that's going to almost guarantee that you will get shadow AI almost assuredly, right? You have to be able to engage your workflows. You have to be able to identify those key areas where technologies like this can add value. Somewhere in the ecosystem, there are opportunities to add value. And so you perform surveys, you engage with your employees, and you find those opportunities to deploy and find ways to make Gen AI safe and effective in the workplace, right? And that really gets to education and raising awareness. You can't emphasize this enough. You have to train and engage your staff. You must teach them about the risks. Many people don't understand. Don't put any personal identifier information into an LLM. We have a joke in technology about LLMs are the Las Vegas of technology. What happens in an LLM stays in an LLM, potentially forever. And that's a risk a lot of folks don't really understand or appreciate. But you also want to support the growth and maturity of your staff, of your workforce as these new solutions develop and increasingly add value. Yeah. So I think that's pretty much sort of a number of key points to make sure that shadow AI does not become a major risk in your organization.
It kind of leads me on to ask you a bit about innovation in highly regulated environments, and how do you structure and build teams to ensure that you can deliver on that value for the business? Because when I look at this in multiple organizations, everybody wants to AI everything rather than going, is AI the right place to get that outcome? But on the other hand, we seem to have a lot of people in the oversight, governance, and very few in the execution and doing aspects of it. And I see this across many organizations. And it always leads me to think, AI hit us at such ferocity and speed. And like when we look at it, we're trying to understand, how do we make it safe? How do we understand where it's going and what it's doing, and how to keep the data privacy piece all intact, and who's consuming it for what reasons. And the last thing we think about is, who's building the technology in and of itself, or like, are we a build by consumer organization? Like I'm interested from a chief technology officer perspective. When you look at this problem, it's come in, you go, okay, now we need to develop AI, but we need to do it in a way that fits within the rules of engagement, because we're a highly regulated entity. But we also need the right mechanisms and individuals to execute on those
Yeah.
mechanisms to be successful.
Yeah, you absolutely have to innovate, right? So I think there are two organizational patterns that have developed that I think sort of can help address some of the tension. You want to innovate fast, but it's heavily regulated. You have to be compliant, right? So the two concepts that I think are very interesting is, the first one, the team of teams, which I'll sort of explain, and then two in a box, right? So, you need dedicated technologists that are expert in cloud, AI, scaling enterprise solutions, and managing costs, and all that really important sort of IT focus, right? That's your engine for innovation. But they're not going to be experts in compliance, or experts in delivery of care, or experts on how to measure patient risk, or many of the other factors that are necessary for working in heavily regulated industries like healthcare, right? So you create multidisciplinary teams right from the get-go, what we call a team of teams, stakeholders with different roles that have different decision rights, but all working together. And this is typically in an actual physical room. Remember those days, right? Really working together in person has also been key. Folks in a room voicing challenges, but also bringing their unique craft and experience to the table. So those stakeholders are there on day one, and you don't want to bolt on compliance when you're in the terminal stages of delivery. That is not the time to try to figure out how to meet compliance requirements. And this is really about developing a collective understanding of the mission and purpose, the stated goals, and how to ensure compliance at every step. Right, this is really, really key. And then once you sort of have alignment, you begin the actual work. Right, so now you have to go into the sort of operational mode, and this is where we focus on what we call two in a box. And this is really kind of core of our expert AI strategy that I talked a little bit about before. We pair a clinician, nurse, or pharmacist with an AI engineer. What could be simpler, right? Small, intimate, and focused. That is the kernel of the process. And they begin ideating, testing how to break down a complex problem. They're experimenting hand in hand to sort of develop that intuition around the art of the possible. And after a few cycles, the relationship begins to formalize. The expert defines the box, the guardrails, the safety measures, and the instructions and guidance for attaining, for example, a good clinical outcome, right? The AI engineer must stay within this box while they turn the technical dials and the AI innovation really begins to accelerate, right? So the two in a box develops intimacy, it creates empathy and a more aligned vision. People are aligned on their purpose. And that box can scale to multiple experts and AI engineers as needed, but always the two together, right? I emphasized it before. What sense does it make to have an AI engineer build a complex uh, 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 solution that they really know nothing about, right? You got to have that sort of two in a box approach. And this has been an incredibly effective strategy for us.
That is actually really interesting. Actually, the two in a box. So you've taken your clinical expert and you've taken your AI engineer expert, and you've put them together. So you, instead of just coming up with a one page of requirements and then somebody doing this is what they want, and
Yeah, that
the
traditional
cart turns
product
into a pony.
management, agile waterfall. No,
Yeah.
this is very, very intimate, very focused, and very experimental. And that's kind of, it builds the sort of the narrative of a lot of this. So that's like, you really have to look at a lot of many, many new variables, the risks, the value, the clinical relevance, all these things that are coming together. Again, it's really feeling much more like science than it is technology. And it's really interesting, exciting. But again, we developed the strategies to make sure we stay focused and can remain focused on that trusted, verified, explainable, and transparent solution.
No, I really actually I love that, Alex. I have to say that is a fascinating idea, and actually you may have something there. I think you need to create a little framework that you can sell to Gartner or Forrester or
Yeah,
someone
yeah,
on the back of that one. Two in a box sounds like it
yeah,
could
yeah,
be the next big thing, because it makes sense instead of just having a one-page requirements document and walking away and waiting for something to fall out of the machine the far side. If you pair up the disciplines, and then I presume you test and trial. So I don't know, I have a friction point of X amount of patients a day with this problem, and you have the technology to maybe able to ease that, and you
yeah.
work it through, you work the problem.
Yeah, yeah. And when you think
Yeah.
about LLMs, what they're really good at, I mean, there's this notion of LLM reasoning and they're improving that, but they're better at following expert instructions and expert guidance. And that comes from the expert. And the AI engineers can take that expert sort of guidance and those instructions, what we call chain of thought, and they can improve the ability of the LLM to analyze and break down complex problems, giving you that better outcome, more accurate, more clinically relevant, and more safe, explainable, and transparent. And that is absolutely key.
Before we finish up, Alex, I might just ask you, if you were to take a stand back look now and give leaders out there advice who are looking at artificial intelligence in all its guises, the key steps that you wish you had known when you started this journey, what would they be? What's the key bits of advice you would give to leaders out there?
Yeah, right. So, I mean, I think, first of all, you really have to look at, what are you trying to achieve, right? So, we talk about a lot more about like owning the outcome. So, what does that mean? You really have to define the problem statement. We talk about a process, which is, we didn't invent it, but the idea of like focusing on the jobs to be done, right? We're talking about agentic, we're talking about workflow. You absolutely have to develop that customer intimacy. And it goes way beyond sort of your traditional, maybe UX and CX, where you're looking at sort of customer journey mapping. This is really starting from first principles, and it's difficult. It's not quite product management. It's not quite go to market, but it involves all these things. And the most important, it involves experts that sort of authentically understand the jobs to be done, the workflow, and what are the outcomes, and what are the desired outcomes, and also be able to measure the potential for risk, and whether or not if a solution even makes sense to build, or whether or not it can be effective, right? That's number one. Number two, where do you find these experts, right? We're very fortunate at Wolters Kluwer. We have over 7,500 clinicians that work on our up-to-date solution for clinical decision support. We also have in-house licensed clinicians. Folks like that, those are your domain experts that are really driving forward expert AI, right? And you can work with customers, and you can find other ways to really understand those jobs to be done. But that is really, really key. And we found that that's the focus point, really from first principles on day one, designed for the professional as the professional, right? You're not looking necessarily, I think we've really moved beyond the idea of just adding sort of Gen AI features that add that like modest productivity gain. It is about closing the loop now. In order to do that authentically, you really have to get much closer to the customer and understand how to add that value and make sure you're doing it safely and effectively, right? I would also make one other comment and note. AI, it's changing so fast and it's really, really intense. That probably is true, but it's changed in ways that make that talent profile subtly different, right? The pedigreed, experts in AI, building teams of these PhDs. You may need folks like that with that skill set, but that isn't the universal skill set you need now. You really need to focus on talent that demonstrates curiosity, a willingness to learn, a willingness to experiment, reason and plan under uncertainty. Not everybody's comfortable with this. Some people like that sort of like, here's the requirements document. Here, let's set up, all of our story points. We'll go into our agile safe mode and we'll deliver an outcome at the end. We'll certify it and launch it. You really want those people that can work in really ambiguous environments, take instructions and guidance and feedback from multiple stakeholders, and be very focused and disciplined, because it's all very new. We're learning at the same time. But I think that is really a key thing that may be overlooked in terms of how to develop the right talent, how to build the right organization, and where you should focus on in terms of your own workflow. So there's a couple things that I would say I would give advice to, and wish that I had been able to put a little more thought into that prior to this journey on Gen AI. Yeah.
Really appreciate it, Alex, and I think there's a lot of takeaways there. We got expert in the loop, two in a box, and stay curious. So
Stay curious.
it's been a very I suppose insightful conversation for
Wonderful.
myself, and I've come away with a couple of takeaways. So I'm sure the listeners will get something out of it as well. So
Awesome.
thanks very much
Been
for taking
super
time out of your
enjoyable.
day.
Yeah, super enjoyable. I really appreciate the time. Wonderful.
Thank you very much.